For those of you who don't know, in Luna Park, Melbourne, Australia, there is this absolutely beautiful heritage-listed dark ride. Made by Pretzel Amusement Ride Company back in the 1930s, this year the ride turns 90 years old. So Luna Park is there thinking, gosh, what are we going to do to celebrate? And then, the funniest thing happened. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So in mid-2023, I started talking to Luna Park Melbourne about the possibility of having a poke around inside the ghost train and floating the idea of being the one to retheme it. Luna Park's ghost train is the last remaining ride from the Pretzel Amusement Ride Company in the Southern Hemisphere. It was bought in 1934 for about $1,200 US. This ride is older than radars or ballpoint pens. It would have been constructed around the time that FM radio was being invented. This is one of the oldest dark rides in the world, and there it was, just sitting a few meters from where I was already being spooky. At the time, I was working with the incredible Spooktober team on the activations for the Luna Dark Festival that runs every Halloween. To cut a very long story short, we crushed it. We put together a very scary haunted house, a terrifying tram experience, and worked with the Luna Park events team on theming of a very exclusive VIP party. Having shown the Luna Park team that while absolutely crazy, we were at least competent, the go-ahead was given to measure up the original ride and pitch the vision. Funnily enough, despite being on the grounds of Luna Park for a lot of 2023 while it was open and closed, I'd never managed to get into the ghost train. Either the line was long and I was working, or it hadn't been set up to run, and I was working. So the first time I managed to look inside the ride through a critical lens was on the 13th of June at 11:06 AM, nursing jet lag from returning from a few months working in Texas with the Walkabout Minigolf crew only a few days before. We found that over the years the train had sunken into a bit of a state. There were some great scenes, which had fallen into disrepair over the years, along with some really beautiful murals from 2001 that had changed locations a few times and were no longer lit properly. Any space where something had broken was either left blank or had a $2 shop decoration put in its place. Absolutely devastating to see on such a beautiful piece of history and the theme park equivalent of finding an original Apple I computer covered in Simpsons stickers. So, the team at Luna Park said they wanted something polished, they wanted something enjoyable for all ages rather than scary, and we all agreed that we wanted to honour the history and the importance of the ride, aiming for a classic and timeless feeling. So, what to put in there? When we started the project, we weren't able to locate any plans or dimensions for the ride layout. So on that first day, along with measuring everything I could with a measuring tape, I also took a full 3D scan of the interior from which I could draw up a set of plans. Something that really stood out to me in the existing ride was that there was no overarching theme or story. This is not unique to this particular dark ride and seems to be what occurs with most ghost trains. Just put something vaguely off-brand spooky into any corner you can and you'll be golden. Even if I wasn't able to tell a full and interesting story, I wanted to have all the scenes tied together so it felt more solid and thought out. Being a train, some early ideas were to have you travel a journey through multiple locations. One such idea was going through the layers of hell, or through alternate dimensions. One idea I particularly liked was having the train go through various stops at a deserted and creepy town, full of people who were just a bit off. However, while the ride track is 130 meters long, the train travels at around 1.4 meters a second. That's over 5 kilometers an hour, or about 3 freedoms per eagle. So you're going at a really fast pace for such a small corner-filled building. This meant we had to choose one main location for our world, and we decided to dip into the history of Melbourne's Luna Park and pay respects to their resident ghost, the White Lady. The ghost is known to haunt the park and has been spotted fairly frequently over the years, so it was time to finally give her the house she deserved. Unfortunately, we couldn't access the train whenever we wanted to play around with ideas. Reality wasn't so kind. So I decided the best way to test out ideas was to go with the second best reality I had available. Virtual. In Blender, I reconstructed the layout of the ride, and then took that across to Unity, where I made a functional version of the ride vehicles so you could pop on a meta quest and ride as often as you wanted, pausing the train as necessary to get a better look at things. The 3D scan was excellent here, as I was able to look at how the front of the train moved versus the back, using the lines worn into the tracks over the years, and perfectly recreate the angle the train faces at any moment, making sure it was exactly the same as the real ride. With this, I was able to redesign the ride decorations over and over and over again, letting everyone ride until we were really happy or physically ill. This was definitely one of the most fun parts of the project, figuring out exactly how everything could go together and what you'd have time to be able to put in, because there's surely no chance you're going to be hospitalized for weeks halfway through the project. Here's where I have advice for people working in any creative area, and you'll see me using this advice over and over again in this project. Use purchased assets. You don't have to always start from complete scratch. Kit bashing and stock assets are incredible tools and time savers, and are often a great resource to learn from. The virtual previs of the ride wasn't the final product, so most of the placeholder elements in that were made of Cinti assets. When I was happy with how the ride looked and felt, it was time to pitch the new design to the team at Luna Park. And most importantly, the CEO, Nathan, trapping him in a hellish dimension where he could only ride a low-poly ghost train for all eternity. He liked it, and we got the green light to go ahead. Funnily enough, a ride that's old enough to have a fossil record doesn't necessarily have the most amazingly complicated ride show system. The trains are powered by a rail through the floor, which runs a motor in the back of the train itself. At show points, the train will hit a light sensor that feeds into a relay. The relay will complete the circuit, connecting an MP3 player's output to some speakers and providing any direct power to any of the effects that are in the scene. Mostly pneumatic. The main downside of the system is that it's very hard to sync up a sound, as the MP3 is always playing on a loop, with the relay effectively powering the speaker on to whatever's playing. The nature of the sensor and the relay also means that how long an effect is on for can't be controlled. Neither can any delay between the triggering and the activation be managed, so that tuning the timing is a matter of physically moving the sensor. Obviously, there needed to be something new. With a project like this, it's important to keep things as simple as they can be, both so you can actually get them done on time, but also because it needs to last. I don't expect my ride show system to be running for the next 90 years, but I designed it so it could, just in case. Knowing I had to control several scenes, but wanting to keep it as small and easy to repair as possible, I ended up designing small controllers that would handle each scene individually. I created a standard unit that would take in either a 12 or a 24 volt signal and activate an output sound and a 12 volt independent output. The sound was from micro SD cards, so it could easily be updated without changing the firmware or the hardware, and any delay between the signal coming in and the desired start time could be set by controls on the board. The duration of the sound and the output voltage could also be set by user-facing controls. All of these elements were user-facing so that one design and one firmware could be repeated for every scene and scenario, meaning that if any were to break or go down, they could be hot-swapped with an identical duplicate, with no extra programming or finessing required. These micro scene controllers were then put into a bank so that all of the ride show could be controlled and altered from one point. Now the train had a brain, but it needed stuff for the brain to do. Looking at how their pneumatics were set up, I felt like they were pretty solid and worth preserving, just hooking into the new control system. But the lights they had were either incredibly bright, showing way too much of everything, or far too dark and faded, lighting nothing. So there was nothing to do than build a new lighting system. In the new Ghost Train, we knew that we want two types of lighting. Some standard ominous lighting that you'd find in any good haunt, and some mighty strong black lights that we could paint around and build more fun and whimsical scenes. Having built a custom set of standard spooky lights for the 2023 Luna Dark haunt, I knew I could make use of that design, with some alterations for more permanent mounting and positioning. But the black lights were gonna be a whole new affair. The standard lights were 5mm LEDs, some with effects, paired with resistors to make them 12V appropriate, and capacitors to smooth out any spikes in the system. These were all mounted to custom PCBs. Now, they could easily go together without these PCBs, but getting a few hundred of those made up was incredibly cheap and saved a huge amount of time in assembly. The PCBs click into place in an inner tube, which then slides into the main light casing. This casing could then have a front attached with a focusing lens or a gobo with any manner of custom design, and finally be attached to a mounting plate that could be fixed to the walls of the train. All of these portions of the lights were 3D printed, and I wouldn't have been able to get through them all without the Bamboo X1C printers. 3D printing ended up being a massive part of this project, something I used for every jig and fixture, not to mention all the custom decorations in the train. But more on those later. I had 4 X1Cs running non-stop the entire duration of this project, and there would have been no way to get that many parts done with that amount of customization any other way. The printers were running an honest-to-God 24 hours a day without a blip, and at this point I feel we've bonded over our shared trauma of such an intense project. For the black lights, I was originally hoping to get something off the shelf that I could easily power. However, what I found was either not very powerful at all, or something designed to run off 240V and nothing else, and everything had a really wide angle of throw. I needed something powerful, directional, and something I could run at a low voltage for safety. I ended up building a custom piece that had a very powerful black light for the size that could mount to a heatsink with an integrated cooling fan. All of these were mounted to a 3D printed inner sleeve, which went into a larger 3D printed case, which could then attach to the same mounting plate. These lights were amazingly bright for how much power they took, and were small and could be placed where I needed, and most importantly, stayed very cool. It's not necessarily a solution I'd recommend for a home haunt, but for the Ghost Train, it shows the power of being able to build a custom piece for a specific job, especially when that piece appeared in every single scene. Of course, not all custom electronic pieces were designed to be hidden from public perception. Very early on, when exploring the feeling of the White Lady's house, I really wanted everything to feel extremely ornate. This was meant to be an old house that had all these beautiful fittings and pieces in it, and items that gathered over hundreds of years. So a style I looked at when trying to put in whatever I could was Rococo, but Gothic rather than light and airy. Now obviously this couldn't extend to everything in the house, purely out of a sense of trying to get things done on time, but I wanted wherever possible to sneak in a bit of excess and give a bit of glamour, while also making everything feel very old. And that meant not putting in anything that looked electric. The first piece made with this in mind were the candelabras. I wanted lots of the scenes to feel like they were lit by candles wherever possible, and those candles needed to be fake ones that could connect to the show system. They were going to have to be on custom holders that we could thread wires through. Once again, 3D printing came to save the day. The candelabras and candles were sculpted in Blender and then printed and painted. The flames were these great little 3V effect pieces that I was able to pick up, and while they didn't provide much light for the space around them, they really sold the effect in a darkened space. So I was able to just pop them in place, run wires through the candles and candelabras before connecting them up to the overall system. These worked so well that we put them in every scene where we could fit them. That only worked for scenes where we had tables for candelabras. What we needed was a candle for the wall. Turns out, candles on a wall wasn't that common in all the fancy domiciles that I was looking at, but what was were gas lamps. A small flame in a glass enclosure, often with beautiful moulding and fretwork. For safety reasons, we couldn't use glass, and I'm no great artist when it comes to metal. 3D printing it is! The glass bowl at the top was an acrylic piece that I ordered from China, and then I modelled the rest of the sconce to fit around. To get the look of a small flame, I once again used the flame effect pieces that I'd used on the candelabras, placed in the base of the bowl. The body and mount were 3D printed, so I could get the exact shape to fit the house, while creating a route for the wiring that connected these lights to the rest of the system. I really love how these turned out in particular, and more than many other pieces, they really cement the feeling of the White Lady's house. The only thing I'd do differently if I were to make them again would be to 3D print the bowls rather than buying them. They cost a lot and took forever to get here. Not to mention that with 3D printing, I could have given them a more custom spooky shape, which could have been really fun. Speaking of something completely different that involved a lot of 3D printing. Much like my house, I knew that the White Lady's house needed a library. Already in the ghost train was a ghoul reading a book with some lovely shelf murals. But he was after a very sharp turn, which meant you didn't really get a lot of time to see anything, and left a wall which you had a much longer time to see completely blank. So I had the incredible idea to extend the bookshelves into a library, but not leave them as a mural. As you were so close to these walls, I thought it would be really a shame to leave them as a painting, where I felt you could get a great 2.5D effect by creating a flattened sort of bookcase. As with all the great ideas in a project, they're really only great when you think that you're going to be focusing on electronics, and surely you wouldn't have to build everything yourself, and even if you did, there's no chance you'd suddenly be hospitalized and lose a lot of working time. So while I was desperately ill, I was lucky enough to have a friend, David, who is a great engineer, come down to Melbourne and design how the library shelves could be constructed and go together. He was also able to cut out all the wood to size with instructions, leaving me with the spookiest IKEA cabinet ever. Once back on my feet, I was able to stain everything and install them into the ghost train, taking a moment to put up a new wall to save from punching through 90-year-old plaster. Well, that's the easy part done, but what do we put on 3cm deep shelves? I felt like the obvious answer was books. But to get the right feeling and sizing meant that once again, these were going to be custom made. In the end, I decided that wrapping book spine shaped pucks of varying sizes in fabric and decorating them would be the best way to get the effect we wanted. So, what's a girl to do but to fire up the 3D printers and start absolutely churning out book-shaped pucks? I modelled 125 different book shapes, all being of a similar style, but different thicknesses, heights, and depths to make sure that the shelves had variety. Feeling that wasn't enough, I purchased multiple colours of fabric to wrap the pucks, which were then patterned with decorative tapes and fun titles. To help get through everything, my mum ended up spending a weekend at my house while we stood in my garage and wrapped hundreds and hundreds of these fake books. We had such a good time, she joined the team of artists working on the ghost train. If you ever get the chance to refurbish a ghost train with your mum, I highly recommend it. We had a great time. There was, however, a lot of library to fill, so I decided to do something entirely unexpected and flog the 3D printers some more. While the shelves aren't completely filled now, we managed to fill up a lot more of the space with a bunch of reliefs that were printed and painted. This also helped break up the space a bit more and add interest to the shelves, rather than just being books. In the end, apart from the wooden beams in the shape of the shelves, the entire library was 3D printed, and you'd never know. That was the end of 3D printed items in the ghost train. Oh, except for... The story of the ghost train refurbishment is one of wanting the final effect to be cohesive, leaning on the great history of dark rides and the classic ways of doing things, while also embracing the absolute cutting edge of available technology. What you see in the train is handmade. There aren't any printed wallpapers or murals or pictures in the ghost train. There's a 30-meter long blacklight mural, hand-painted by some of the most talented artists around. Every portrait in the ghost train was painted by hand by a portrait artist. All the wallpapers and wood paneling was painted by one of the most incredible teams ever assembled. The train doesn't have any projectors doing silly light tricks. It's handmade, and a testament to the incredible people dedicating themselves to their craft. The train was also entirely rideable in a self-contained VR headset before we even started painting a single wall to make sure it was perfect. To develop the plans, the entire existing ride was 3D scanned using a smartphone app. The stencils for the painted wallpaper were made using a laser cutter. All the lighting and effects are modern, low-powered devices that will last longer while running cool with less maintenance. And the tool used most across the entire project was the 3D printer. I haven't covered all the scenes in the ride here. Gotta keep some stuff a surprise for the guests, or even all the items we have in the scenes I've talked about. There's old-fashioned hand-painted silhouettes throughout the ride of all the people who worked on the refurbishment in 3D printed frames. There's hands pushing through and warping doors that we came up with as an idea as we left one night, and had them sculpted, printed, and installed by the next morning. There's door handles, knockers, faces, bones, sculptures, jigs, fixtures, and any manner of things in every corner that we were able to make perfect for this beautiful piece of theme park history, thanks to changes in tools in the last 90 years. The ghost train in Luna Park Melbourne may not live forever, and the retheming we put in might get updated or even entirely removed in the future. But for this moment, I know that we put in something truly beautiful that we couldn't have done when the ghost train was new. And I think that's pretty cool. I don't know how to end my videos.